React.js 6 modules. JavaScript modules allow you to break up your code into separate files. This makes it easier to maintain the code base. ES modules rely on the import and export statements. Export. You can export a function or variable from any file. Let us create a file named person.js and fill it with the things we want to export. Okay. Now there are two types of exports, named and default. Named exports. You can create named exports two ways, inline individually or all at once at the bottom. Inline individually, person.js. Export const name equals to has a jsa. Export const age equals to 40. All at once at the bottom, person.js. Constant name equals to has a const age equals to 40. Export in curly brackets name comma age. Default exports. Let us create another file named message.js and use it for demonstrating default export. You can only have one default export in a file. Message.js const message equals to empty parenthesis arrow. This is arrow function. Inside the curly brackets we have constant name equals to as a const age equals to 40, return name plus is age plus years old. Export default message. Export default message. Fine. Import. You can import modules into a file in two ways based on if they are named exports or default exports. Named exports must be destructured using curly braces. Default structures do not. Import from named exports. Import named exports from the file person.js. Import of name comma as from dot / person.as in double quotation semicolon. Import from default exports. Import a default export from the file message.js. Import message from dot / message.js in double quotation semicolon. Okay, now let's go to the next chapter. React.js 6 ternary operator. The ternary operator is a simplified conditional operator like if else. Syntax: condition, question mark, expression if true, colon, expression if false. Here is an example using if else. If authenticated, render app, else render login. Okay. Here is the same example using ternary operator. Authenticated question mark, render app method, colon, render login method. Okay, fine. Complete this ternary operator statement. Blue question mark, render blue, colon, render red. Okay, fine. Start the exercise. Let's go to the next chapter. React render HTML. React's goal is in many ways to render HTML in a web page. Okay. React renders HTML to the web page by using a function called React.DOM.render method. The render function. The React DOM.render method function takes two arguments, HTML code and an HTML element. The purpose of the function is to display the specified HTML code inside the specified HTML element, but render where there is another folder in the root directory of your React project named public. In this folder there is an index.html file. You will notice a single div in the body of this file. This is where the React application will be rendered. Example: display a paragraph inside an element with the ID of root. React.dom.render p hello p document.getElement by ID root. The result is displayed in the div ID equals to root element body, div ID equals to root closing div. Note that the element ID does not have to be called root, but this is the standard convention. The HTML code. The HTML code in this tutorial uses JSX, which allows you to write HTML tags inside the JavaScript code. Do not worry if the syntax is unfamiliar. You will learn more about JSX in the next chapter. Create a variable that contains HTML code and displays it in the root node. Const myElements table tr th name th tr tr td John. So table header, it goes table data, table row, fine, table. React.dom.render myElement, comma, document get element by ID root. The root node. The root node is the HTML element where you want to display the result. It is like a container for content managed by React. It does not have to be a div element, and it does not have to have the ID equals to root. Example: the root node can be called whatever you like. Body header ID equals to Sandy header. Display the result in the header ID equals to Sandy element. React dom.render p hello document.getElement by ID Sandy. Okay, fine. Now let's go to the next chapter. React.js. What is JSX? JSX stands for JavaScript XML. JSX allows us to write HTML in React. JSX makes it easier to write and add HTML in React. Coding JSX. JSX allows us to write HTML elements in JavaScript and place them in the DOM without any create element method and or append child methods. JSX converts HTML tags into React elements. You are not required to use JSX, but JSX makes it easier to write React applications. Here are two examples. The first uses JSX and second does not. Example 1. JSX const myElements equals to h1 I love JSX h1 const root equals to React DOM dot create root of document dot get element by ID root dot render of myElement. Example 2 without JSX const myElement equals to React dot create element h1 curly brackets. I do not use JSX. Const root equals to React DOM dot create root document dot get element by ID root dot render myElement. As you can see in the first example, JSX allows us to write HTML directly within the JavaScript code. JSX is an extension of the JavaScript language based on ES6 and is translated into regular JavaScript at runtime. Okay. Expressions in JSX. When with JSX you can write expressions inside curly braces. The expression can be a React variable or property or any other valued JavaScript expression. JSX will execute the expression and return the result. Example: execute the expression 5 plus 5. Const my element h1 React is curly bracket 5 plus 5 times better with JSX h1. So React is 10 times better with JSX. Inserting a large block of HTML. To write HTML on multiple lines, put the HTML inside parentheses. Example: create a list with 3 list items. Const my element এখানে equals to this parenthesis এর মধ্যে লিখছে একটা unordered list with list items apples, bananas and cherries. Okay. One top level element. The HTML code must be wrapped one top level element. So if you like to write 2 paragraphs, you must put them inside a parent element like a div element. Okay, example: wrap 2 paragraphs inside one div element. Const my element in parentheses div, and in the div there are 2 paragraphs. Fine. JX will throw an error if the HTML is not correct or if the HTML misses a parent element. Fine. Alternatively, you can use a fragment to wrap multiple lines. This will prevent unnecessary adding extra nodes to the DOM. A fragment looks like an empty HTML tag. Example: wrap 2 paragraphs inside a fragment. Const my element equals to in parentheses we have empty tag, মধ্যে আছে 2টা প্যারাগ্রাফ. Fine. Elements must be closed. JSX follows XML rules and therefore HTML elements must be properly closed. Close empty elements with closing tag. Const my elements input type equals to text, closing tag ঠিকমতো দিতে হবে. JSX will throw an error if the HTML is not properly closed. Attribute class equals to class name. The class attribute is a mass used attribute in HTML, but since JSX is rendered as JavaScript and the class keyword is reserved word in JavaScript, you are not allowed to use it in JSX. Use attribute class name instead. JSX solved this by trying class name instead. When JSX is rendered, it translates class name attributes into class attributes. Example: use attribute class name instead of class in JSX. Const my element equals to h1, class name equals to my class hello world h1. Fine. Conditions if statements. React supports if statements but not inside JSX. To be able to use conditional statements in JSX, you should put the if statements outside of the JSX, or you could use a ternary expression instead. Option 1. Write if statements outside of the JSX code. Example: Write hello if x is less than 10, otherwise goodbye. Const x equals to 5, let x text equals to goodbye. If x is less than 10, text equals to hello. Const my element h1 দিল একটা হেডারের মধ্যে, হেডার 1 এর মধ্যে আবার টেক্সট বসায় দিল এর মধ্যে। সো এখানে হ্যালো হবে, আসলে গুড বাই হবে না। অপশন 2, ইউজ টার্নারি এক্সপ্রেশনস ইনস্টেড। রাইট হ্যালো ইফ এক্স ইজ লেস দেন 10, আদারওয়াইজ গুড বাই। const x equals to 5, const my element equals to বলতেছে যে h1 হেডারের মধ্যে মনে করেন যে ইয়া আছে, এক্স আছে, এটা কি 10-এর চেয়ে ছোট কিনা, ছোট হইলে হ্যালো, ছোট না হইলে গুড বাই হবে। এন্ড অফ কার্লি ব্র্যাকেট, তারপরে আবার h1 ক্লোজিং ট্যাগ। খুব সুন্দর। নোট দ্যাট ইন অর্ডার টু এমবেড এ জাভাস্ক্রিপ্ট এক্সপ্রেশন ইনসাইড JSX, the JavaScript must be wrapped with curly braces. স্বাভাবিক। Test yourself with exercises. Render a p element without using JSX. Const paragraph equals to React dot create element. আচ্ছা, দেখা যাবে। So let's go to the next chapter now. React components. Components are like functions that return HTML elements. React components. Components are independent and reusable bits of code. They serve the same purpose as JavaScript functions but work in isolation and return HTML. Components come in two types: class components and function components. In this tutorial, we will concentrate on function components. In older React code bases, you may find class components primarily used. It is now suggested to use function components along with hooks, which were added in React 16.8. There is an optional section on class components for your reference. Create your first component. When creating a React component, the component's name must start with an uppercase letter. Class component. A class component must include the extends React.component statement. This statement creates an inheritance to React.component and gives your component access to React.component's functions. The component also requires a render method. This method returns HTML. Example: create a class component called car. Class car extends React.component. Inside curly brackets we have render method. Again curly brackets return h2. Hi, I am a new car. h2 is function component. Here is the same example as above, but created with the function component instead. A function component also returns HTML and behaves much the same way as a class component, but function components can be written using much less code, are easier to understand, and will be preferred in this tutorial. Example: create a function component called car. Function of my function car parenthesis in curly brackets return h2. Hi, I am a new car. h2 tag closed. Okay. Rendering a component. Now your React application has a component called car which returns an h2 element. To use this component in your application, use similar syntax as normal HTML car. Display the car component in the root element. Const root equals to react DOM.create root document.get element by id of root.render car. Props. Components can be passed as props, which stands for properties. Props are like function arguments and you send them into the component as attributes. You will learn more about props in the next chapter. Use an attribute to pass a color to the car component and use it in the render function. Function car props. Return h2. I am a props dot color car h2. Const root equals to react DOM dot create root document dot get element by id of root dot render car color red. Components in components. We can refer to components inside other components. Example, use the car component inside the garage component. Function car method in curly brackets return h2 I am a car h2 tag closed. Function garage in curly brackets we have return of return parenthesis who lives in my garage এটা h1 এর মধ্যে তারপরে car closing tag const root equals to react DOM create root react document dot get element by id root dot render garage. Components in files. React is all about reusing code, and it is recommended to split your components into separate files. To do that, create a new file with a .js file extension and put the code inside it. Note that the file name must start with an uppercase character. Example, this is the new file, we name it car.js. Function car method return h2 hi I am a new car h2 tag closed. Outside the curly brackets we have export default car. To be able to use the car component you have to import the file in your application. Example, now we import the car.js file in the application and we can use the car component as if it was created here. Import React from React. Import React DOM from React DOM / client. Import car from car.js. Const root equals to react DOM dot create root document dot get element by id root dot render of car closing element. It's a car element. HTML element exercise. Then the following React component person. Okay. So since the video is longer than 20 minutes, so we close it. I invite you to watch the 4th episode of this React tutorial series. Thank you.